Hey there, everyone. Today, I'm bringing you an episode that I originally did a while back, like quite a while back. And I'm re-releasing it because honestly, it's a case that's always stuck with me. It still does. And it's the story of Maura Murray. I'm sure you've heard of her. Now, Maura's been missing since 2004. And here we are, all these years later, and still no one really knows what happened to her. No trace of her. There's no answers. It's just a mess of theories, dead ends, and a family that's still very desperate to find her. So, heads up, this is not a one and done story. It's a big story. It's a long story. It's a freaking messy story. And it's going to take a few episodes to unravel. If you're new here, you know that I don't usually do multi-part deep dives unless it's incredibly deserved. And part of the reason for this is actually it's a personal thing of mine. I absolutely hate it when I'm on a social media platform somewhere. It's like, hey, click here to go to part 2. No, screw that. I don't want to do that. I want the whole thing right then and there. So I get it. And this is not something that I would normally do, but there is so much here. And you'll discover why this story needs that. Before we get into Maura's life, let me say this very, very clearly. Maura's case might be cold, according to the state of New Hampshire, but it's far from forgotten. Her sister, Julie, stays active. She's on TikTok. She answers questions. She tries to keep the case alive. The family has never stopped searching. And plenty of other podcasters have done great work on this case as well. Lance and Tim of the Missing podcast and the 107 Degrees podcast by Aaron Larkin. I'll share their links in the show's description. But above all, I want you to remember, there is a family out there who has been hurting for nearly 20 years. They deserve some answers. Everything I share in this episode and the next episodes that follow come from reputable sources. When I talk about facts versus theories, I will make that clear because God knows there's enough confusion about this case already. And by the time you hear this, maybe something will have changed. I certainly hope so. I really, really do. If you are listening to this and you have any information, no matter how small or weird or tiny you might think it is, it doesn't matter. Call the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit. Their number is 603-223-3648. Or you can also email them at coldcaseunit@dos.nh.gov. All right, let's go and get into Maura's story. There is no doubt that you have heard the story of Maura Murray. And in the event that you haven't, you need to settle yourself in for a mystery that hundreds, if not thousands of people have been trying to solve since her disappearance in 2004. So let's start with what we do know. We know that Maura was born on May 4th, 1982, and that at the time of her disappearance, she was 21. She grew up in Hanson, New Hampshire, where in high school, she was the star of the basketball and track teams, as well as an honor student. As a matter of fact, she broke her high school record for the 2-mile run. Now, even though Maura lived with her mom in Hanson, she had a very close relationship with her dad, Fred. Now, Fred coached Maura in sports, and they would often go camping or hiking, and they usually did this in the New Hampshire area. When Maura graduated high school, she was admitted to West Point. Yes, West Point. And there, she studied chemical engineering. Her sister Julie was already at West Point. So, these two women are just freaking incredible. So Maura then followed her there. They were both on the cross-country and track teams while at West Point. And Julie had said during an interview that while you're attending West Point, you are stressed to the max every minute of every day, not only physically, but mentally as well. When Maura was a freshman at West Point, she met her boyfriend, Billy Rausch. Julie and Maura often talked about Billy, and Julie was not a huge fan of his. She called Billy a talker and that he was a little much for Julie. but Maura seemed to really like him. We do know that while Maura was at West Point, she was actually dismissed from the school for violating their honor code. Now, a West Point classmate of Maura's, Megan, was interviewed during a documentary about Maura, and she said that during a class trip, the students were allowed to do some shopping at a store within Fort Knox. That's pretty cool. As they walked out, the military police grabbed Maura, and it turns out that Maura had stolen a small item, either a lipstick or a bottle of nail polish. Megan couldn't remember, but because it was an honor code violation within West Point, which they take extremely seriously, Maura was found guilty of the crime and given the choice to withdraw from West Point. I don't know what the other option was, but she just went ahead and withdrew. Megan later asked Maura why she did it. I mean, really? I kind of want to know the answer to that question too. Why would you go and screw up something that seemed to be going so well? And Maura said she didn't know. She had the money to pay for it. Megan felt like it was really out of character for Maura. And Megan also said was that evidently it was well known that Maura was bulimic and that her sister Julie could sometimes be hard on her. And Maura would sometimes get down on herself about this. Megan also said that she believed that if Maura wanted to disappear into a new life, she could. Megan fully believes that Maura is still alive. And Megan further said in another interview that the relative who happens to run the official Maura Murray Facebook page had told Megan, quote, not to say these horrible things. Watch what you tell people. Now, I don't know how that comes across to you, but, to me, I don't know, it kind of sounds like a threat, right? After leaving West Point, Maura, she was only there for 3 semesters. When she was asked to leave, she then transferred to the University of Massachusetts, or UMass, in Amherst, Massachusetts. And she did this to study nursing. On November 3rd of 2003, and according to author James Brenner and documents received from the Amherst, Massachusetts police, while at UMass, Maura was caught using stolen credit card numbers to order food. Another female student had noticed someone had been using her credit card number to order pizza. The name of the pizza place was a place called Pinocchio's Pizza. The student then called the Amherst police, who in turn contacted the pizza place. Now, after Pinocchio's had checked their records, the managers at Pinocchio's found that the order had been delivered to Maura's dorm room. That same night, after Pinocchio's found out about this issue, Maura called that pizza place again and ordered a pizza. She used the same credit card number as she had before. This time, the police went with the guy delivering the pizza, and when he got to her dorm room and she signed the bill, the police then showed up. Now, eventually, Maura did admit to using the credit card number, and she said that she had found the number on a receipt that happened to be in the trash. Now, in my head, there's so many things already going on. First of all, usually receipts don't have the full number on them. It's just the last 4 digits of the credit card number, right? And back then, you didn't even need the security code on the back of your card like you do today. And I don't even know if they had them on the back of the cards. I doubt it. Well, the police took Maura out into the hallway. They took a photo of her. Now, it's not a mugshot, though. Many people refer to it that way, but now it's like really unnerving to even see this photo. If you Google the name Maura Murray, you'll see all kinds of photos of her smiling and happy. But this one picture in particular, it's in black and white. It's very grainy. It shows someone, Maura, in my opinion, very pissed off. And if looks could kill, this is definitely a snapshot of that definition. It's definitely a stark contrast to all of her other photos. But the thing is that the pizza, it wasn't the only thing that she had charged on the card. There were purchases on different occasions that would make you believe that she was actually ordering food for not just her, but for her and somebody else. Now, in one case, the food purchase was for 2 subs, 2 Subway sandwiches, and a salad. But remember, she was doing a lot of training too, right? The total charges for all that food on that stolen credit card was under $250. When Maura did appear in front of a judge, the judge told her that if she could stay out of trouble for 3 months, or in other words, until February of 2004, they would remove the violation from her record. Now, in another report, it was stated that it was a 6-month probation period, which evidently is very common now, regardless of whether it was 3 months or 6 months. Maura had to keep her hands clean and avoid any further trouble. So Maura now, remember, she's at UMass. If she's caught using this stolen credit card for food, she's put on probation. And it's now Thursday, February 5th, 2004. This is 4 days before Maura goes missing. Maura calls her oldest sister, Kathleen, while Maura is on break at her security job, which is checking student IDs on the UMass campus at Melville Hall. Now, currently, Maura is on the dean's list at UMass. As I said, she is very, very smart. Another version of this is that it was Kathleen, Maura's sister, who called Maura. So, either way, Maura calling Kathleen, Kathleen calling Maura, whatever the case is, these phone calls happened around 10:20 p.m. And this is Thursday night, February 5th. It was not unusual at all for the both of them to talk. They did so just about every single day. They were very, very close. Evidently that night, Kathleen and Maura had a conversation about some problems that Kathleen was having with her fiance and eventual husband, Tim Carpenter. Kathleen personally, she had a drinking problem and had been in and out of rehab many, many times. And that night, the night that Kathleen and Maura spoke, Kathleen was upset because she had just been discharged from a rehabilitation clinic. And after being picked up by her fiance, he took her to a liquor store on the way home, which caused Kathleen to have an emotional breakdown. So yeah, this is the guy that you're going to eventually marry, who knows you have these problems. And he says, oh, hey, yay, you're out of rehab, yay. Hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and stop by a liquor store, shall we? God, seriously. So that was on Thursday that this conversation between Kathleen and Maura happened. On Friday, February 6th, around 1:20 in the morning, so technically this is a few hours after Maura has just had her phone call with her sister, but because now that we passed midnight, we're now on Friday the 6th, so I'm trying to keep this as literal as possible, Friday the 6th of February. So at about 1:20 in the morning, and hours after the phone call with Kathleen, Maura's supervisor, Karen, came by and she noticed that Maura was very, very upset. As a matter of fact, Maura was so upset that she couldn't even talk. And her supervisor realized that Maura, she couldn't even continue her job. So she took Maura back to her dorm room, which was in Kennedy Hall. And this is literally only a few hundred yards from where she's working at Melville Hall, checking those student IDs. Karen asked her, hey, what's wrong? But all that Maura responded was, my sister, and then made a motion towards her cell phone. Maura had 2 sisters, so it's not sure, and she wasn't sure which sister she was referring to at the time. In a later interview with Kathleen, and this was years later, this wasn't like months, this was years later, Kathleen said that she couldn't recall anything in their conversation that would have upset Maura so much. So Maura's supervisor, Karen, she would later respond to an interview where she said that Maura was basically unresponsive. She was staring blankly at the wall. Karen even remembers a fellow supervisor telling her that he felt something was up with Maura. So that night, when Karen found Maura in that position, being so upset, she noticed that Maura's cell phone was on her desk. Now, this was very unusual because the students are not allowed to use cell phones while they're working. So this led many people to think that it was a phone call that Maura had either received or made or whatever, but it was this phone call that had made her so upset. I mean, her cell phone's there, so that would be the logical conclusion, right? Well, Karen was so worried about Maura that Karen wrote down her own cell phone number and gave it to Maura and then walked Maura back to her dorm room. And Karen even mentioned that she didn't even want to leave Maura alone. So this had to be something incredibly devastating, right? Everybody seems to think that this is totally out of character for Maura. And they're even so worried that they have her leave her job, take her up to her room, and her supervisor is so concerned she doesn't even want to leave her alone. The thing is, though, that Maura said that she had a roommate so that she would be okay. So Karen went ahead and left. But the problem was that this was a lie. Maura lived by herself. What's interesting is that just a half hour before this phone call, the supposed phone call, and we're only calling it a supposed phone call because it's only assumed at this point, right? Just simply because her cell phone was on the desk in front of her. Just a half hour before this, a student was involved in a hit and run accident at 12:20 a.m. This student, Petrie, was found lying on the ground. He had been hit by a car and he had suffered severe head trauma. Now, the driver of the vehicle had fled the scene. And according to an article in the Daily Collegiate, Petrie was found on the side of the road at the intersection of Triangle and Mattoon Streets. This poor kid ended up spending over a month in the hospital in a somewhat coma-like state. He said that he could hear people speak to him, and he was able to speak back, but only in fragmented sentences. He couldn't even open his eyes when the doctors asked him how old he was. He thought he was 27, much older than his current age. So there was quite significant brain damage done when he had this accident. So this accident that happened, this hit and run with Petrie, was 1 mile from where Maura was working that night in Melville Hall. The reason I bring this up is that because there have been multiple discussions of the damage to Maura's car after she had her accident on the 9th, which is going to be coming up in an upcoming episode. Now, the thing is, when we get to Maura's accident, the theory is that the damage on her car in the accident that she had on the 9th is in dispute. Nobody knows whether she hit a tree or if she hit a snowbank. And I know you're wondering, why are you bringing this up now in regards to this? How the hell is this important in the accident that Petrie had? Well, the reason for this is that it leads to a theory that Maura may have had enough time on her hands or on her break while she was working at Melville Hall to run out and get a coffee or a soda or whatever, and she accidentally hit the student on this break. Because when she gets back to Melville Hall, where she's working, she's so bothered by this that she eventually can't even talk, and she's in no state to work, which is when Karen, her supervisor, finds her. Now remember, this is just theory. This is not fact. This is just theory. There was never any proof that she had anything to do with the accident to Petrie whatsoever. Petrie couldn't even recall what kind of car it was that hit him. But yet another theory is that Maura purposefully got into the accident on the 9th, and remember, this is in an upcoming episode, and that she did this on purpose in order to cover up the damage already done to her car. So all kinds of things are going on here now. So the next day, which would now be Saturday, February 7th, Maura's dad, Fred, drove from his home in Weymouth, Massachusetts to Amherst. Depending on the direction he took, it was a 105 to 110 mile drive, so about 2 hours and 20 minutes to 2 hours and 41 minutes. The reason that her dad was coming to visit that particular weekend, according to her dad, was to purchase Maura a new car because hers wasn't running very well. Maura's car was a 1996 Saturn sedan, and it was evidently only running on 3 cylinders, according to her dad, Fred, even though the car was only 8 years old. And after I did a quick check of this particular vehicle, I found out that, yeah, it really doesn't have a lot of great reviews. There's plenty of complaints about this particular car, about the oil and how quickly it burns oil and the head gaskets, which affect the cylinders. So I don't want to get off topic here, but yeah, it was a crappy car. So the bottom line is it's very, very possible that Maura's car was in fact having some of these same issues. The reason I mention all of this was that even though Fred went to Amherst that weekend, and even though Fred brought along with him $4,000 in cash to purchase a different vehicle for Maura, they never ended up buying a new car. There were also no accounts from dealerships, according to the missing podcast, that they even went to look for a new vehicle or a different vehicle. So this leads to yet another theory that she may have somehow been involved in this hit and run and called her dad to let her dad know. So the next day, her dad came up with her with this cash in hand to purchase another vehicle. Again, total theory. We don't know why a car was never purchased that day. We don't know exactly why her dad decided to show up. Although, it does make sense, based on what I found out about the crappy car. So it's still Saturday, regardless. Her dad is still there, right? He still has his cash. Likely they went shopping, just maybe didn't find exactly what they wanted. Who knows? But that night, Maura and her dad, along with a friend of Maura's, went to dinner at the Amherst Brewing Company in Amherst. Evidently, during this evening and during all of the discussion at dinner, there was no discussion of having been out looking for a different car that day, which you think would have been a topic of conversation, right? Another theory is that the reason that Fred was there at all was that he was there because of Maura's sister. Now, remember, Maura did say sister to her supervisor that night when she was working at Melville Hall. When she asked, hey, what was wrong? She pointed to her phone and then said sister, but the supervisor didn't know which sister. And then Maura had to be escorted back to her own dorm room. Also, what's interesting, as far as we know, during the entire time that she's with her dad, she doesn't mention to her dad about what happened the night before when she got so shook up and she had to be escorted back to her dorm room. During the dinner later that night, where it's Maura and it's Maura's dad and Maura's friend all having dinner, the theory is that one story, at least, is that after dinner was all done, her dad wanted to go back to his hotel. Maura didn't want to drive her car, so Fred, her dad, said that she could instead use his car, which was a brand new Toyota Corolla. Now, keep in mind, they had just had dinner, probably drinks at the brewing company. Why would Fred allow Maura to drive his brand new car if she had already been drinking? And maybe she hadn't. Maybe that's the whole reason he let her use his car. So one of these versions is that Maura then drives and drops off her dad at his motel and then drives back with her friend to the UMass campus so that they can go to this party. Another version of this story is that Fred first drives both of the girls to a liquor store to buy alcohol for the party. And you might think, well, why in the hell is she saying that? He could have taken her anywhere. Why a liquor store? Well, as we'll find out in a future episode, there were multiple bottles of alcohol found in Maura's vehicle. So Fred somehow gets dropped off at his motel, and then Maura and her friend, driving now Fred's car, still go back and head to the dorm for the party. The next thing that happens is that around 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and this is on Sunday, the 8th of February, Maura decides that she wants to return her dad's car to him that night. Now, he wasn't expecting the car until much later that day, or even the next day, however you want to look at it. And according to a magazine article, Maura's friend was surprised that Maura did this because Maura had been drinking. But nonetheless, Maura told her friends that she was heading back to her dorm room. But instead, what she did is she took her dad's car and drove to his motel. And this is where things start to get a little hazy. Some people say that Maura left the party alone. Others say that she left with a guy, but they weren't able to provide a description of him. So when her friend that was out to dinner with them is asked about what happened, she has never been able to give any kind of version as to what happened that night. So either she was too drunk to know what was happening, that she couldn't even recall who was at the party, or she's holding something back. Another friend of Maura's, Sarah, who was also at this supposed party, has never said anything either. And this kind of leads some people to wonder if there was even a party at all. Now, as Maura is driving on Route 9 in Hadley to return her dad's car where he's staying, it's only about 4 miles away. Maura hits a guardrail on North Hadley Road and Maple Street. Now, North Hadley Road ends at Maple Street. It's a T intersection where you can only go left or right. Maura, however, hit the guardrail straight ahead, and this caused about $9,000 worth of damage to Fred's new Toyota. When an officer did arrive, he wrote an accident report, but it's unknown if there were any field sobriety tests done. We do know that there were no charges that were filed. So why wouldn't the officer who responded cite her for drunk driving, if that was even the case? And assuming she was drunk, right? Maybe she wasn't. But she was coming supposedly from this dorm party and had perhaps purchased alcohol earlier in the evening. One of the questions, too, is that her dad didn't even expect to see her until later on that day. So what was the big rush to get the car back to him that night? So now what happens that she's been in this accident is the Toyota is towed, and Maura then gets a ride, supposedly from the tow truck driver, to the motel where her dad is staying. And this is another area that we're kind of getting hazy again, because some of these things just don't quite add up. You know, one theory is that Maura had a key to her dad's room and she just let herself in. Now, this was not true. She did not have a key. Another theory is that she knocked on his door and he let her in that night. Now, this is also not true. Another story is that she entered the motel, headed to the lobby, and fell asleep on the couch in the motel lobby. And the motel worker that night then later lets her into her dad's room. But the thing is that Fred says he didn't even know that Maura was even there until about 10 o'clock the next morning. Now, I don't know if he means in his room or if he just means at the motel in general. If it was his room and if Fred had thrown the security latch on his door, that night, how was Maura then even able to enter the room? How did the worker that night even know that Maura was Fred's daughter? I suppose he could have looked at her driver's license, but even then, wouldn't he then have to call the room and verify it? He wouldn't have just let her in. What we do know is that someone called Maura's boyfriend, Billy, that night at 4:49 a.m., and that phone call was placed from Fred's phone. So now let's say that Maura was there. Why would she use her dad's phone? Her phone could have died, right? But back then, the amount of items running on your phone, like apps and such, they were minimal, right? And battery life was well over 24 hours. Some companies even boasted that the phone's battery would last from 3 days to a week. I mean, can you imagine? Whatever the reason is, someone, we're assuming it was Maura, had made a phone call to her boyfriend, Billy, who was in Oklahoma. Now, at the time when he got the phone call, it would have been 3:49 a.m. his time. So let's pause here for a second and just consider this time frame. If her accident occurred at 3:30 in the morning, Maura would have had to wait for the police and then wait for the tow truck to arrive, right? She then would have had to have been driven to her dad's hotel approximately 10 minutes away. And let's say all of this took maybe an hour. So let's say that Maura shows up at the hotel at 4:30 in the morning. This phone call to her boyfriend is happening at 4:49 in the morning, just a handful of minutes later, from her dad's phone. In my opinion, there is just no way that she fell asleep on that couch in the motel or hotel, wherever he was, if she was the one that had made the phone call to Billy from Fred's phone. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, if, however, she did actually fall asleep on the couch in the hotel, which I don't know if the hotel staff would have even put up with that in the first place, right? The only person who could have called Billy would have been Fred because the call came from Fred's phone. There's no reason to believe that Maura would have had her dad's phone. On the other hand, all of this could be completely explainable. If Maura got dropped off by the tow truck driver at the hotel, she then walked up and asked the desk clerk to phone her dad's room and either let him know that she was on her way to his room or he came down to get her. That would make more sense. However, Fred has always said that he didn't even know that Maura was there. And again, we don't know if there means in the room or just in the hotel until he woke up the next morning. And I believe it was like 10 o'clock. So how does this all fit in? I know that this is just all speculation. And quite honestly, it's really all we have right now. The only person that can speak to any of this is Fred. We can only go by what he alone has said. Now, when Maura finally does tell her dad about what happened to his car, she was very, very, very upset. Her dad, Fred, admitted that he was really upset with her, but that he didn't yell at her. He told Maura that it was going to be okay and that it wasn't the worst thing in the world. He's actually quoted as saying, quote, "If this is the only trouble a kid ever causes, then you're a pretty lucky parent." Now, we are pretty sure that Billy did in fact speak with Maura that night and not Maura's dad. Billy evidently talked with Maura about the accident and she was still very upset about it. But later on, Billy would say that he felt like there was more than just the accident on her mind, but he didn't know what. So you might be wondering, why is Billy even in Oklahoma, right? Well, he was an Army lieutenant who was stationed at Fort Sill, and just a few weeks earlier, according to one report, Maura had actually gotten a summer job at a hospital in Oklahoma so that she could be closer to where Billy was. In a later interview, Billy would say that they were engaged to be engaged. As I mentioned earlier, Maura and Billy, they met while Maura was at West Point, and they did continue to date after she had left and then gone to school at UMass. They would often travel back and forth to see one another. And according to Billy's mom, she already felt as if Maura was even her own daughter. So on Sunday the 8th, Fred then finds out from his insurance company that the damage to his car would be covered. So what he then does is he rents a car and takes Maura back to her dorm room. And then Fred heads to Connecticut for a job that he had scheduled. Later that Sunday night, at about 11:30 that night, Fred then calls Maura and reminds her to pick up the accident forms from the Registry of Motor Vehicles for the incident that happened to his vehicle. Once she did that, he planned to talk with her Monday night at 8 o'clock on the 9th to go over these forms and to fill out the accident report. Now, after midnight that same night, which is now technically Monday the 9th, she has just talked with her dad, and Maura ends up searching MapQuest, one of the few places at the time that could get you directions to where to go online. And she searched MapQuest to get directions to the Berkshires and Burlington, Vermont. That same morning, Maura finished a homework assignment and sent it in at 3:32 in the morning. Now, there's a few hours that go by, and we have no idea what has happened or what's going on within these few hours. All that we know is that at 1 p.m. on Monday the 9th, Maura sends an email to her boyfriend, and the message said, quote, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I don't feel talking to much of anyone. I promise to call today, though. Love you, Maura." Now, shortly after sending this email, she then made a phone call to Bartlett, New Hampshire, and asked about renting a condo at a resort. This is a location where her and her family had gone on vacation in the past. This phone call to the resort lasted 3 minutes, and the owner ended up not renting the condo to Maura, mainly because it was too short of a notice. Now, Bartlett, New Hampshire, it's about 60 miles away from Maura's location. Shortly after this phone call, at 1:13 p.m., Maura's phone records indicate that she had called a nursing student friend. Now, this is also an assumption, but based on what I've read and learned at this point, she had called her friend Erin because she wanted to return some clothes that she had borrowed. It's theorized that the clothing that she wanted to return were some scrubs, and some say it was a lab coat that she had borrowed from this friend. And when this friend asked her, why was she returning this? Because, she was in nursing school at UMass, she needed this. Maura told her that she had to be away for a while. And then when Erin asked her what it was all about, all that Maura said was, my sister. Now, Erin did not need these clothes right away. So she told Maura not to worry about it. But Maura ended up returning the clothes to Erin anyway. She stopped by, she knocked on her door, and when there was no answer, she just left the bag of clothes at the door. At 1:24 p.m., Maura then emailed a supervisor with the nursing school and told them that she would be out of town for a week due to a death in her family and that she would contact them when she returned. Now, the dean of nursing at UMass said that Maura had emailed a professor on Monday indicating that she needed to take some time off because of a family problem and would return to class this week. Now, it's not known if the dean was paraphrasing and just not using the term death in the family, but I don't know why they wouldn't. Again, there are inconsistencies over what Maura told her professors and others about the reason for having to leave school. But the problem with all of this is that there was no death in the family. At 2:05 p.m., Maura then calls a telephone number that gives information about hotel bookings in Vermont. And this call lasts about 5 minutes. What she's actually doing is listening to a recording. Their line had been down that day, and so she was listening to recordings as to what was available at 2:18 p.m. She then calls her boyfriend Billy and leaves him a voicemail telling him that they would talk later. This call lasted about a minute, according to Billy's mom. And Billy's mom also said that the message was something like, I love you, I miss you, I want to talk. Billy had actually given Maura the cell phone that she had as a gift, but it was his mom, Sharon, whose name was on the account. And that's why she has this information. What Maura did next is she packs her car with clothes, textbooks, and toiletries, along with her birth control. She also had a cell phone charger and a travel adapter for the cell phone. Another thing that she packed with her was her favorite stuffed animal, a monkey. And this is something that her dad had given her. Now, others say that it was a gift from Billy. I'm not quite sure who gave her this monkey, but nonetheless, she had this stuffed animal with her. Around 3:30 that Monday afternoon, Maura left the UMass campus in Amherst in her 1996 Saturn, the same crappy 3-cylinder vehicle that she was driving that her dad was hoping to get her evidently a new car. And that day, there actually weren't any classes at UMass because a snowstorm had rolled through. But still, she decides to take off and make her way to her destination. So here's what we know so far. Maura's a great student. She's an athlete. She gets into West Point. While at West Point, she is caught stealing some minor item, lipstick or nail polish, whatever it was. And because of West Point's code of conduct, she is asked to leave the school. She then enrolls at UMass. And at UMass, she is caught using stolen credit card numbers to order food. The total amount was about $250, and the judge tells her that the charges will be dropped if she stays out of trouble for somewhere around 3 to 6 months. Then on February 5th of 2004, she is working her security shift at UMass checking student IDs. That night, late that night, she talks with her sister, Kathleen, or Kathleen calls her. Kathleen had just left rehab, and her fiance had taken her to a liquor store. At 1:20 a.m., technically Friday, but still that same evening, Maura's supervisor finds Maura at her desk, pretty much upset and unresponsive. And the only thing that she can say to her supervisor are the words, my sister. That same night, another UMass student is hit by a car in a hit and run less than a mile away, and he suffers severe head trauma. We then learn that on Friday, February 6th, Fred, Maura's dad, drives up from Weymouth, Massachusetts to Amherst to visit Maura and says he's there to help her shop for a new car because her current car is barely running. There's no clear record that they ever go to a dealership. The next day, Saturday, they supposedly spent some time looking for a car. No car was purchased. That evening, Maura, her dad Fred, and her friend all have dinner at Amherst Brewing Company. Maura then either takes Fred over to his hotel where he's staying in Hadley, Massachusetts, again, only like 4 miles away, or somehow they end up back over at this hotel. But in the end, Fred lets Maura use his brand new Toyota Corolla. Then on Sunday, about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, so late, if you want to think about it this way, late Saturday, early Sunday morning, Maura evidently leaves this dorm party to return Fred's car to him. And this was not expected to be done, at least at this time of night. Maura then crashes the Toyota into a guardrail on North Hadley Road. At 3:30 in the morning, police respond. There's significant front-end damage. There's no sobriety test or charges filed. A tow truck driver gives her a ride to her dad's hotel. And stories here vary. We don't know. Did she knock on his door? Did she sleep in the lobby? We just don't know. But what we do know is at 4:49 a.m., so an hour and 19 minutes after she had her accident, someone calls Maura's boyfriend, Billy, in Oklahoma from Fred's phone. Who made the call? Maura or Fred? It's still kind of really unclear. The next morning, later that morning, Fred claims that he didn't even know that Maura was there until about 10 o'clock in the morning. And he's upset about the accident, but tells Maura that it will be okay. Insurance is going to cover it. Fred then rents a car, drops Maura at her dorm room, and leaves for a work assignment in Connecticut. On Sunday night at 11:30 p.m., Fred calls Maura and reminds her to pick up the accident forms so that they can fill out the report together by phone on Monday night about the Toyota accident. Then on Monday at 3:30 in the morning, Maura emails homework to a professor. She uses MapQuest to search directions to Burlington, Vermont. At 1 p.m., she emails her boyfriend saying, "I love you more, stud. I don't feel like talking to much of anyone." Between 1 and 2, she calls a condo owner in Bartlett, New Hampshire, asking about renting. No luck. She then calls a lodging info line for Stowe, Vermont. She then calls a friend, says she's going to return some borrowed clothes, and tells her the reason why is that she has to leave, and just says, "my sister." She then emails her nursing professor saying that she needs time off for a death in the family, but no such death occurred. Later that afternoon, she packs up her vehicle, that Saturn, with clothes, textbooks, toiletries, birth control, her stuffed monkey, a phone charger, and at 3:30 leaves the UMass campus in her 1996 Saturn. So in the next episode, we're going to discuss what all of Maura did the day that she went missing, where after she left the campus, she had another accident, where that accident happened, who talked with her after that accident, and the whole timeline of events. You're also going to discover how shady some of these people appear to be, and we'll have even more mysteries to unpack about all of this. So that will be next week. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate you all so much. If you enjoy episodes like these, please don't hesitate to click like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. I appreciate it so much. Thank you. We will talk soon. Bye for now.